anointing in the sanctuary. There is a stillness in the atmosphere. Oh, come lay down the burdens you have carried, for in the sanctuary, God is here. He is here. God is here to break the yoke and lift the heavy burden. He is here. God is here to heal the hopeless heart and bless the broken. Oh, come lay down the burdens you have carried, for in the sanctuary, God is here. He is here. God is here to break the yoke and lift the heavy burden. He is here. God is here to heal the hopeless heart and bless the broken. He is here. God is here to break the yoke and lift the heavy burden. He is here. God is here to heal the hopeless heart and bless the broken. He is here. God is here to break the yoke and lift the heavy burden. He is here.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi. Sorry, you guys can obviously hear me. So good evening. Sorry, guys. We just had to play a few songs so we can wait for our attendees to trickle in. So we'll begin by having our sister Agnes give us our opening prayer.
Okay, let us pray. Hold on 1 second. Okay, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this evening. We thank you for bringing us before you once again. I pray that whatever we're about to discuss here, that you help us, that whoever needs to hear what we're about to discuss, a much needed topic to help us develop, and so so doing, be able to help with your work. We pray that you bring everybody here. Remind everyone that the meeting has started, and whatever our speakers have for us, I pray that if they've forgotten anything, that you bring it to their remembrance and you help this meeting to be successful. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Agnes. So I'd like to welcome everyone again tonight to our panel discussion. We'd like to thank the Women's Department first and foremost for allowing us to use this month to go through a few career exploration discussions or topics. So without any further, and I'll go ahead and we'll begin. So tonight, our conversation is centered around pursuing doctoral studies in social science disciplines. So we're going to be speaking to 3 panelists who have all gone through the process of either they've finished or they're acquiring their doctoral studies, and we're going to learn from their success. Without further ado, we'll start by having our panelists introduce themselves. So we have Ishmael. So Ishmael, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I just copied and pasted my bio on my school's website, so I'm just going to quickly read through it. I'm hoping that it's not too long for what time would allow, but I am a PhD candidate of African history at the Department of History at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I had both my undergraduate Bachelor of Arts and graduate Master of Philosophy degrees in history at the University of Ghana, Legon. As an Africanist scholar, I have broad research and teaching interests in pre-colonial Africa, Atlantic Africa, the African Atlantic, health and healing in Africa, African slavery, and environmental history, particularly how Africa's environmental setting, broadly understood, shaped Atlantic reactions in Africa and in its diaspora. I am currently writing a dissertation on agricultural festivals and spiritual ecologies in the Volta River Basin of Ghana during the early modern period. Outside of history, I am a committed family man, as well as a Zumba and fitness enthusiast. I am also currently serving as the Young Adult Ministry assistant leader at the Capitol Hill Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Washington, D.C. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ishmael. So our next panelist is Adjeiwaa-Manu.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I hope you're doing well. My name is Adjeiwaa, and I am currently a social scientist at the FDA. I received my Ph.D. in sociology from the University of Pennsylvania back in August. And my research broadly focuses on the impact of racism on health outcomes and also inequities in access to healthcare. I'm really interested and committed to the holistic wellness of Black populations worldwide. And so I hope that the work that I want to do and that I'm currently doing can contribute to that in some sort of way. In addition to my PhD, I obtained a master's in statistics and sociology from Penn. And then my undergraduate degree is in sociology and African American studies. So that's definitely where my passion for Black studies and Black communities in general really was nurtured. Outside of school and work and research, I also am a musician. And so I continue to play for churches or wherever I'm called to minister. And so that's a really great outlet for me. Beyond that, I also consult for an educational nonprofit where I get to mentor and work with lower income and under-resourced college students to help them develop professionally and then also succeed the best they can in school. And so I support a scholarship program where I'm a program director for them. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also glad to be here.
Thank you, Nana. And lastly, we have Bright.
I'm sorry, really quickly. Nana's voice was a bit fuzzy on my end. I don't know if it's just me or everybody else's. So.
It was slightly. I think, Nana, it might be your your earpiece.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's better.
Thanks, Nana. And then lastly, we have Bright.
So it's great to be here. My name is Bright. I hold a PhD from Northwestern University in history, as well as a master's degree in African Studies from Oxford University and a BA in history and political science from the University of Notre Dame. Currently a presidential fellow at Northwestern, as well as an assistant professor at University of California, San Diego. And I'm currently writing a book about African intellectuals who work to transform and radicalize the study of Africa in the diaspora, as well as on the African continent. Outside of academia, I love soccer. I play soccer myself. I also do consulting work. Right now, I'm involved in the largest library being built on the African continent that focuses on photography. I like to pretend to cook, you know. I cook here and there sometimes. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you guys so much. Again, thanks again for taking time out your busy schedules to be with us tonight. So without any further, before we continue, I do have a few housekeeping. If anyone has questions throughout the conversation, feel free to drop them in the chat. You can send it to either myself, Agnes, or Ashley, or you can put it in the general chat and we'll get to it during our Q&A session. So our first question is, what motivated you to pursue a doctoral degree in your social science discipline? And how did you choose your specific area of focus? So Ishmael started, so we'll start with Nana and then we'll go around.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Is it better? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I will say, just like I said in my bio at the beginning, my interest in research was nurtured definitely in my first year of college. I took a course on the Harlem Renaissance, and that was my first introduction to the world of research and just the idea that you could take a question that people were talking about and find a little piece of it and contribute to the conversation was really fascinating to me. So my first project was actually about Andre 3000, the musician, and the way he expressed his masculinity as a Black dandy in his song, Hey Ya, if you're familiar. So that was very exciting to me for whatever reason. I had a teacher who believed in me and I really, really appreciated her. And so throughout my undergrad, I took part in research assistantships, and I later was part of the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship, which is specifically devoted to helping students of color as well as under-resourced students in pursuing a PhD. And so that was really my first introduction to what a PhD could look like. After I graduated, I had a boss at a think tank who was a PhD in political science. And the work we did was research on closing the racial wealth gap. And we got to share that work with Congress. And so I was fascinated that you could use a PhD to be an advocate and that people could come to you and ask for your expertise in trying to make change. And so that is really what sparked my interest in pursuing a doctoral degree. I wanted to be an advocate and I wanted to have a seat at the table so I could advocate for Black communities. And in terms of my interest in Black communities and health, again, that was nurtured in undergrad. I ended up doing a senior thesis on how Ghanaian communities grieve after the loss of a loved one in the United States. And that actually sparked my interest in Black people's mental health and well-being. And so that led to me in my dissertation work, doing work on the impact of racial inequity on inequalities in specifically mental and behavioral health and access to healthcare.
Okay, thank you so much, Nana. Bright, the same question for you. So what motivated you to pursue your doctoral degree in history? And how did you choose your specific area of focus?
So for me, I lived in Ghana until I was 12. And when I was in Ghana, I was not exposed to African history. It was not until I got to college that I took an African history class. So I became very fascinated about African history, right? Because there's a way in which when you were growing up in the US, you begin, some people, if I can speak for myself, where I began to distance myself from Africa because Africa was so demonized. So when I came to college and I got there, and all of a sudden I'm learning about the Ashanti Kingdom, the different complex political system, like, democratic practices. It began to open a new door of inquiry as to what is African history, what is its utility for us, for identity, as well as for humanity as well. So I decided to go to Ghana after my first year to conduct research on how the British government taught Africans their own history and how the teaching of history changed, if it changed at all, in the post-independence. So after that, I also went to England because, as most of you know, Ghana was a former British colony. And then while I was there, I also realized how England became an important hub of shaping Black radical thinkers. And Nkrumah found himself in England. There's another man by the name George Padmore, who was close to Nkrumah and later moves to Ghana to help with nation building. And he was from Trinidad and Tobago. So I decided to also just travel to Trinidad and Tobago to try to trace these ideas that we scholars call or term Pan-Africanism. Where is it coming from? How are people in Grenada or Trinidad also thinking through this whole concept of imperialism and colonialism shaping their daily life? So it is this particular interest that allowed me to decide to just pursue a PhD to study more, right? And then try to map it on to what we are now facing when we talk about Black solidarity, right? Black freedom, trying to understand the plurality of these engagements. And we obviously saw in 2020, when George Floyd was killed, a lot of people became interested in Black studies. And part of my work looks at how Ghanaian intellectuals were crucial to the development of Black studies. So how then do we talk about Black studies, talk about the need for Black studies in this modern times when we overlook the interplay and the tensions that it had when you have Africans, Caribbeans also being part of this particular project? So these are the exciting questions that keep me up at night, that allows me to just continue to read and engage. So I just stop right here, and Ishmael can also continue.
Those are the questions that you are paid to answer, right?
Exactly. Paid to travel and answer, right?
Yeah, for me, I was in class 1 in Ghana, as we say. I was in class 1. Is that elementary school? I guess here the equivalence. And I remember my teacher used to tell me that because of the way I was organized and because of the way sometimes I'm able to like lead my class at the age of 6, she thought that I would be a teacher. And so the possibility of growing up to become a teacher was always with me, even as a kid. And yet we all know that teachers are not really like valued in the context of Ghana and sometimes even in the US. And so that was the only reason why I wasn't so sure of becoming a teacher. It was not until I heard one of my Sabbath school, or if you are not an Adventist, a Sunday school teacher talk about how whatever you decide to do in life, do it so well that, you know, for instance, like they always say, if you decide to sweep so well so that the next person who passes by would say that you are like the best sweeper they've ever seen. That phrase like really motivated me to think of the highest height I could be, you know, if I wanted to take the profession of teaching. And so that is to say, like, that is how I decided to become, you know, trained to become a professor and teach in the university. Now for history, I have always been fascinated with history, but it was not until I was in the University of Ghana doing my bachelor's, I read about the history of the Atlantic world. And I remember growing up in a small town in Ghana called Pom, around the Tema area. We had a little fort, which was somehow dilapidated, but people still used it for several other things. And we used to play there as kids. Now, reading Atlantic history and learning that my small town, which is even sometimes irrelevant in Ghanaian conversations, made contributions to the broad Atlantic really excited me. And so in my undergraduate thesis, I explored that history about how my small town contributed to, you know, Atlantic interactions in Ghana. When I did my master's thesis, I connected that to those of you who know about Ghana, the Dangbe or littoral coasts in Ghana, how they all contributed to the Atlantic. And that is really what I have been interested in these days. So I think about conversations about, you know, the Volta River, the people who traded on the Volta River in the pre-colonial times, and how they all contributed really to broad Atlantic conversation. And so in terms of motivation, I would say that really it's because of what I think I get to do impact people's lives, become the teacher that I believe I've been called to. And that is really why I decided that I want to teach in the highest educational place.
Thank you guys so much. In you guys' all response, everyone sort of, your academic careers have been focused on minority groups. So what are some of the biggest challenges you guys have faced within your studies, or that you did face when you guys were students, for Nana and Bright and Ishmael, as you're continuing your studies, and how did or have you overcome them? So anyone can go.
I mean, I can start off. So like you rightly mentioned, for people like us who study minority groups, there's always the question of having to justify why you study what you study. If I studied in Ghana, if I did my PhD in Ghana and I was studying about my town or writing about my town, I don't have to justify, I don't have to explain to people why boom is relevant in Atlantic conversations. But once, you know, the horizon becomes broader, how do someone like Bright, who doesn't really study boom, you know, why would he be interested in my town and why it's important to Atlantic conversation? So that challenge of having to constantly justify why where you study is important is one of the challenges. The other challenge for me has been sometimes unlearning and relearning, because I had all my education in Ghana until my PhD. So transferring over to the US is the toughest challenge I've had, has always been having to, you know, unlearn some things and relearn just to fit the context that I am in. I would say that in my fourth, going on my fifth year, things are better now. I think I'm more able now to appreciate the system and know what is required of me. But yeah, those are just to mention two of the challenges I encounter in my study.
Thanks. Bright, Nana.
Yeah, I can go. I would say one of the biggest challenges when I first got to graduate school was I didn't know what I didn't know. There are so many unwritten rules in predominantly white institutions that you kind of have to figure out on your own, or if you're fortunate to maybe have a mentor or somebody to guide you, you can sort of learn those rules. But I think that was definitely a huge challenge and adjustment. Also, I had worked for a year before I came to graduate school, so just getting used to 3-hour classes, having to do a lot of readings was definitely challenging for me. Once I got to dissertation stage, I think the biggest challenge was motivation, because you go from 2 to 3 years of coursework where professors control your time in terms of the homework you have to do, or maybe your research assistantship, to moving to a space where you're now an independent scholar and you're asked to write a dissertation proposal and no one really tells you what that's supposed to look like or what a good proposal is. They're just like, come up with something and your committee will react to it. And you kind of have to take this very amorphous idea that you have and make it concrete and justify to these folks why you should move forward into the dissertation stage. So I think that the motivation to just keep getting through that stage was a huge challenge for me. I definitely, my close friends can tell you I wanted to drop out every day, to be quite honest. But I would say, in terms of overcoming, one thing that my mentor told me was, you have to be humble throughout the PhD process. You can't save the world with your PhD. You just contribute to a little sliver of the conversation. That's what your dissertation should do. And that took a lot of pressure off of me, because I realized, okay, I just got to have a narrow enough question where it's manageable, but I can make some sort of contribution to the larger conversations around race, identity, health, etc. So I think that piece of advice really kept me going. And number two, I would say finding my why, finding my reason for why I wanted to do this degree also kept me through. Third thing was having a really loving church community. That was something I actually paid attention to when I was looking for graduate schools, and they helped me move from my apartment when I was leaving graduate school. They fed me. Sometimes I'll be crying in church. The deaconess would notice and give me tissue. They invited me to their homes. They invited me to join their ministries. And I think having that space where I didn't have to be an academic and people weren't looking at me in that way was a very safe haven. And I will say definitely that church community got me through a lot of the challenges I experienced.
Thank you, Nana. Bright.
So to share my, I'll also be very brief. I think the biggest thing for me was really coming to understand that education is political, right? That when there's nothing, in my humble opinion, such as objectivity, right? Things are political. If you don't know that, you might begin to doubt your abilities when you're making certain arguments, right? That arguments have implications, and sometimes people can be implicated in these things. So they can then try to hide behind, you have to move beyond binaries, right? You have to complicate that, you have to write a more nuanced paper. I mean, things are political. I mean, we have to come to that understanding. And that was something that I had to deal with, but I had also a very supportive mentors and advisor and friends. So I think that was very helpful. But for me, my biggest challenge actually, I don't think was necessarily in academia. My biggest challenge was just trying to have a balanced life, because there's a time where I can work 24/7. I don't make time for friends or family. And that was something that I had to change. And that being attentive that, when you wake up, the first thing that you're supposed to do is not your work, but doing other things. Because it came to a time where my friends stopped inviting me to things, because every time they invited me to something, it was like, I'm busy. I got work. I got this. I got, I was not eating. A friend of mine had to put a timer that goes off every day at 6:30 to remind me to have dinner. So the biggest challenge was to actually realizing that, hey, you still have to have a full life. Because if you don't, you have all these back problems. And guess what? You'll be easily replaced. And when you're gone, nobody's going to remember you. So I think that was my biggest challenge.
Well, I'm glad you guys overcame or still overcoming these challenges. So we're going to jump into one of the questions in the chat, because I feel like it goes to one of the questions that I had on our list. So it says, quick question for the panelists, especially those raised in the US. How do y'all explain your pathway to your parents or family, given that children of West African immigrants are typically encouraged to go into medical professions? Did you experience any pushback, and how did you deal with it?
So I guess I could go. When I started Notre Dame as an undergrad, I decided to pursue political science and history. I was the only one. I was the only African who did history. I was the only one who came in straight doing this type of thing. Most of my friends who were Africans were in the science track. Later people will switch, right? I had a friend who later switched from business to English, and on the day of graduation, that's when she informed her parents that, she did not do business. But it was tough. It was tough. My parents, my dad had always been very supportive. My parents, in terms of me majoring in history, when people came for me, my dad reminded people that, hey, he cited, my dad loves history, so he cited a couple of people who majored in history and had been successful. So in terms of parent-wise, it was good. But as we all know, as a Ghanaian community, people invite themselves to also be an extension of your family. And those extension of my family decided to inform my parents that, why am I wasting time and resources pursuing history? Am I just going to sit in Ghana and go to secondary school? People used to have friends who used to send me messages that, Forbes magazine reminding us that history is top 10 worst majors. I'm wasting my time. I'm not going to make any use of my life. I got that consistently. I still get that. I just don't mind people, because I think one of the things, one of the ways I was able to overcome these things was I went to my parents and I also presented to them a plan. I'm a planner. I do these 10, 20 years. And I said, there's a lot of, I did this program, for example, it's called the PPLC at Harvard. There's a wealth of knowledge and opportunities that our people don't even know exist. If I take this track, I will be very successful. Let me show you what people who have taken this track have been able to do. So I came with evidence upon evidence upon evidence of the road that other people have taken, and that was not necessarily too familiar to the broader Ghanaian community. And I also held on to this quote by the president of our school that says, "Let no one ever again say we dream too small." As a way to constantly remind myself that the path that I've taken, although traveled by few, is worthwhile.
Thank you so much, Bright. Nana, Ishmael.
Yeah, I got to give a big shout out to my parents. They're both on the line, but they are my biggest fans and biggest supporters. Ever since I was little, I've never been a math or science person, even though I have a degree in statistics. I don't like blood or hospitals or anything like that. So being a doctor or a nurse was out of the question for me. And my parents have supported every dream I've had. When I wanted to go to an arts high school, they let me go. When I wanted to pursue a sociology and Africana studies degree, they were fine with it. For them, it's always just been work hard and stand out and do your best wherever you go. So I actually did not experience any sort of pushback. And I think because I knew my parents were supporting me, it was easier to deal with any potential pushback from other people, because I think for me, it was like, well, if my parents are okay with it, doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. I think the other thing, and I think Bright alluded to it, is having a plan. And I would also say being entrepreneurial. And I say being entrepreneurial because I think it's important to go for what you want, not be afraid to ask questions, and not be afraid to put yourself in places where you can be able to move forward. And don't be afraid to ask for help. That's the way anyone is able to move forward and be able to achieve opportunities that they might not otherwise know about. So I would say, I think I can remember maybe one situation in church where somebody said, "What are you going to do with sociology?" And in my head, I was just like, watch me. For me, it didn't discourage me one bit. I was just like, I will find the connections I need and I will. So for me, I think just focus on having a plan and putting yourself in places where you can get to where you need to be, if you do experience any sort of pushback.
Thanks. Ishmael, go ahead. Sorry.
Similarly, I didn't have any pushback from my parents. And I think that's one advantage sometimes we get for those of us whose parents were not like really as educated as other people. My parents have always supported every decision I have taken because I think they trust that I know what I am looking for. And so they give me all the support. But of course, like Bright said, I've always had to deal with other people, sometimes extended family members, sometimes friends, sometimes even church people who just mean well, right? The question is, what are you going to do with history? I remember that when I came to the US, people asked me, so you came all the way from Ghana to the US to do history, and then what? But I think at the heart of this question or this conversation is each individual deciding what success is for them and just pursuing what that thing, you call success is. Because the fact is that you cannot please everyone. I think Bright is doing very well. Bright is my boss. I met Nana recently. Nana is doing very well. And yet you would have people questioning the relevance of what they do. So really, like, you cannot please everyone. So just decide what is success for you and pursue it to the best of your ability. And once you meet that point or that purpose that you have set for yourself, no matter what people say, I think you will be happy. I am happy. The smaller Obviously, that's small for all of us, but I believe that this is what we have chosen, and we are happy to be doing it, no matter what people say.
Thank you guys. And I personally am happy that you guys are doing it. So we're gonna open it now for questions from the audience as we continue the conversation. So if anyone has a question, you can go ahead and either raise your hand, put it in the chat, and we'll acknowledge it. I think there was one. Oh, sorry, Agnes, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's one more question in the chat.
Okay, so it says, with each of your fields of study, what careers did you all end up in? So, any?
So officially, I guess I'm an assistant professor, but I also do a lot of consulting on the side. I'm actually very much interested in economic development. That's what part of my research is about. So I'm also constantly in conversation with policymakers. I am also just laughing at a comment.
Yeah, someone says you
So,
are an assistant professor, which is
yeah. So I'm assistant professor, and I do a lot of consulting on the side as well. So I do things that interest me, and I make sure I get paid for those things. Right? And yeah, I mean, it's such a great life. I prefer this life than the other life struggle that my friends are engaged in, because most of the time people think that if you go the route of going to medical school, that is when you make money. Most of my friends are leaving medical school with $300,000 in debt. You go do a PhD, even if you don't get a job, you don't have any debt, because most of the time it's fully funded, right? So.
Anyone else, Nana, Ishmael?
Currently I'm still in school, so I guess this question is not for me, but ultimately I plan to toe the line that Bright is towing, to be a professor. So yeah.
And I'll represent the non-academic folks. I am an analyst for the government, and broadly, I evaluate a lot of the internal processes within the Food and Drug Administration, and I specifically work in a Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. So we evaluate a lot of their internal processes to help the center run more efficiently. Then in terms of the consulting, I'm a program director for a scholarship program for under-resourced college students. And then I do music gigs on the side. So yeah.
A little bit of everything.
Okay, sorry, Bright, go ahead.
Now, I was just going to quickly add too, so I also have a number of friends who are historians, but who are not in academia. I have friends who are working for NASA. I have friends who are working for McKinsey. So sometimes, because a lot of the time, our Ghanaian community, we don't know what one can do with history, but there's a lot. I mean, I have people who are historians who are working for Goldman Sachs. Right? So there's a lot more opportunities in history. I'm also trying to just make an advertisement for my field and Isha's field as well. So we need more historians.
Yeah, I was going to add the same thing, that not just history, but when you take any of the social sciences and you do a PhD in them, you do not necessarily have to become a professor or a teacher if you don't want to. One of the fields that is currently in vogue is environmental history, and people who do environmental history are going to all the places that probably a medical doctor would not be able to go. One of our graduates from Georgetown is currently working with the CDC and is the first history hire, in that field, because he did history of epidemiology in Africa, So there are so many places. I know people who work in the consult for the World Bank, and they were trained as economic historians, So you can go anywhere if you decide to do a PhD in the social sciences.
Yeah, a PhD really teaches you a set of transferable skills that you can take anywhere, as long as you know how to explain it to an employer, right? You learn how to critically analyze text. You learn how to read broadly and narrowly. You learn how to synthesize information. You learn collaboration. You learn how to take a vague directive and make something out of it. And those are essential skills in so many fields. I have a cohort mate of mine who works for Zillow. She's in tech and working as a population scientist. So there's really no shortage, just as Bright and Ishmael were saying, of what you can do.
Thank you, guys. I think we have a hand raised in the audience. Dr. Amponsa.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to see you, young people with your PhDs. And we thank God for you guys. At least we know there are people following the older people. I've had a chance to teach for 45 years and retired right here in Maryland. And it's nice to hear from you. But I have a question. Did you notice that when you got your PhD, you discovered even the field that you are in is so vast that your knowledge is limited in a very specific area? Secondly, did it make you humble in the field of knowledge and academia? Thank you. And again, congratulations.
So, Ishmael.
I guess because I'm still writing my dissertation, I can answer this question. Absolutely, absolutely. That the further you go, you realize like how limited your knowledge is, and that is why there would always be, reviews of your own work. So I definitely agree, and that is why, like you rightly mentioned, we all have to be humbled by what we think we know, and sometimes how we think we know what we know. So I definitely agree with you.
Likewise, I mean, there's an old proverb that states that everybody has knowledge except for those who don't ask questions. Right? The pursuit of a PhD is just asking questions because we do not know much. And the beautiful thing is to be able to every day get the opportunity to ask new questions. And every time people ask me, oh, Bright, what's your research about? I tell them I'm confused because things are always unraveling and we are learning more and more and more. So just the opportunity to read every day, to engage with amazing thinkers, so really is a great dream come true.
Yeah, agreed. I think the PhD has made me a lifelong student, and it allows me to fulfill my intellectual curiosities. And yeah, I mean, even in my program, I could see that I was just, like I said before, looking at a little sliver, and that alone humbled me. And even when I got to go to different colloquiums or listen to different people speak in different departments, I was just simply awed by, like Bright said, the different ways you can think about the same problem. And even in the government space, I have the highest degree on my staff, and yet I'm still learning from the people who are around me because it's a new field. And so really they are the experts and I'm learning from them. So I'm constantly humbled. I don't put any airs about me because if you're truly learning, you should constantly stay humble.
Yes, indeed. We have one more question, Auntie B.
My question, I'm saying something about funding. How do you pay for the program? And if you are not paying, if for some reason halfway through decided say, what happens? Do you have to pay some money back, or it's a loss? That's all. And my question.
Okay, thanks, Auntie.
Oh, thank you so much for your question, Auntie. So when you're pursuing a PhD, they actually know that some people might leave because interests change. So normally for
mostly it's based on their behavior, or is symptomatic. All right, go ahead.
So most of the time, for most of the top schools, when you get into a PhD program, it's fully covered. They will give you a 5-year deal. There are also external fellowships, Fulbright, SSLC, that people can also win to support your education. So you don't have to pay for anything. That's why I was saying, that's why earlier I made a comment that the argument that people make about, oh, you should go become a doctor, medical doctor, because you gain more money does not stand necessarily true. Because if you're coming in with $300,000 in debt, somebody who has zero debt, obviously wealth accumulation, that it will favor the person with no debt. But at the same time too, if you decide to leave, you're in the PhD program, let's say you're your third year, you decide to leave. You can leave and actually leave with a master's degree, and you don't have to pay anything back, as far as I know. But if others have different opinions, definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely the same experience I have seen. I just want to add that so even beyond the third year, the thing is that because you are on funding, every other year you are being assessed in terms of academic performance. And really I think because of how it's structured, before you get the opportunity to fail, you would have been kicked out before you fail, because really you are being always assessed and you are always provided with resources to make sure that you do not, fail. So if at any point your committee or, whoever is in charge of your work realizes that you are not, living up to the standard, I'm sure you will be advised on what to do. But when that happens and you get out of the program, you're not going to be giving any money. And for an international student like me, that means that I will be out of status. And when I'm out of status, I have to go back home to Ghana. So there's constant assessment of your progress, and there's no way you would get out of the program because of academic performance, unless there are other reasons.
Yeah, agreed. As long as you're looking for programs that are fully funded, to not take loans. And I would definitely advise not taking loans if at all possible. One thing I will say is initially when I was thinking about getting a graduate degree, I wanted a master's, but I told myself I would not pay for a master's. So I looked for PhD programs where I could get my master's along the way, just in case I wanted to leave in the middle. So same situation that Bright talked about. And I would say that also in PhD programs, it's very rare to fail in general. It's not, I know it sounds silly to say, but it's not about the grades. It's about learning how to get the skills that you need so that you can do your research well. So typically, you're going to be getting A's and B's. It's only in statistics courses where people might not do as well. And even there, the threshold is like a B- or better. So typically, you really do not need to worry about that. As long as you're making steady progress in your research, you will be fine at that end of year assessment. But definitely speak to the professors, pay attention to what current students are saying, because sometimes what you see on the acceptance letter might not match students' financial realities. So if you do get into the program, make sure that you're paying attention to what people's finances actually look like in real life in that location.
Thank you guys for the good advice. Any more questions from our audience? If you do, you can put it in the chat, or you can unmute. I do have one question here. So it says, how have you navigated the job market and found job opportunities through your career? And what advice would you give to someone who just started out in the field?
Job market as in the academic job market, or just
I guess you can speak to your personal experience. So
for me, with academic jobs too, it can be seasonal, right? And one season there's a lot of jobs, the other season there's not a lot of jobs. So for me, I had additional funding at Northwestern, so I decided to test the waters. So I applied for 5 jobs, 5 academic positions. Most people will apply for 60, 80, depending. But because I had the privilege of knowing that I still have 3 years of funding left at Northwestern, I can do that. And if it does not work out. So I applied for 5 jobs. I was able to get 2 out of the 5. which was nice. And so it wasn't like necessarily a struggle, but it was also a lot of there was a high demand. I think with the whole George Floyd, the protest, there was also a high demand for people doing Black studies work, people who were doing history. I know last year there was a lot of jobs in African history. I mean, Chicago was hiring, so many people were hiring. Navigating the job market, I got a lot of advice from mentors and faculty and friends. People read my work, gave me feedback. I created a website to control the narrative around myself because people will look you up. So I like to try to dictate that. I talked to people. So before I went on the job market too, I was talking to people years ahead, right? How was it like? What did they do? Ups and downs, who to ask for letters of recommendation. So that was very helpful. So I just ended there.
Yeah, on my end, I honestly didn't really want to be a professor. I tried to be open in graduate school, but it just was not for me. I'm good at teaching, but I just couldn't see myself doing it for the long term. So I opted not to be on the academic job market, although I respect the profession very much. So for me, that meant that I had to do a lot of independent work because a lot of PhD programs don't really train you to be a non-academic. They know how to train you to be a professor, which is okay. So what I did was, like Bright, I talked to a lot of different people. I did informational interviews with different people I had worked with, and I would ask them at the end, is there someone you can connect me with who might be able to be helpful for me? And so through that opened up a really big world of people that I got to connect with and build relationships with. So I ended up landing one fellowship with a maternal health equity organization, and that person had a PhD in sociology, and she reviewed my resume for me. She reviewed my cover letters for me, and she pointed me to different job opportunities. I also did this other internship, and interestingly enough, one of my coworkers sent me to the link to the current job I'm at, but I didn't know she had sent it to me until much later on. But little things like that where you build relationships, and I was part of internships that I found out from other people, that is what actually led me to find the job that I actually have today. In terms of preparing for interviews, I would say, as I said before, knowing how to translate to your degree to what the job needs is very important, whether you're on the academic or the non-academic job market. And so I would say that was the biggest piece of advice that really helped me with navigating. Yeah, I would say that's the main things.
I am about to go onto the job market. So these are great advice from you two. I'll just add that there are a lot of different pathways to success. And so the fact that one person went a certain route does not mean you should go the same route, or doesn't necessarily mean that if you go on the same route, you'll be successful. But there are common things that everybody has to do. And for a PhD student, I guess it's the dissertation, right? So just make sure you are doing a good work. And whenever you get the chance, just talk about your work. Like, both of you said, let people know about what you do, and someone may have you in mind for when you get on the job market.
Indeed. We have one question here. It says, there's been a lot of mention of mentors. How were you able to find your mentors, and what was the most challenging aspect of your journey, and how did the mentors support?
I can start. So mentorship is very, very critical in the US system, as I have come to realize. It's your success in the PhD program depends largely on the relationship you have with your mentor, because they are writing recommendations for you. They are signing you off on things. You directly work with these people. So it is very important. So for me, I chose Georgetown because of the advisor I was going to work with at Georgetown. Largely speaking, for the other places that I did not go, I don't want to mention the names for political reasons. It was because of the advisors there and the things I had heard about them. You know, you want to go to work with someone who, in my case, I wanted someone who really valued the fact that I'm coming from Ghana, I'm coming from Africa. This was going to be my first time being exposed to American education, and I needed someone who can empathize with me, someone who can be patient with me, but also someone who could respect me for who I was and for my style of learning, as well as someone who is willing to sometimes go a little further because of the style of learning that I have. So that is what the things I consider. But ultimately, you also want to find out how interested the person is in either their own work or your work. I don't know if that makes sense, but the person should be like really interested in your work or their own work and how your work sort of fits into theirs. Because when they are doing their own work, when they are reading literature on their own work, they begin to think about you and how they can help you build yours as well. So it's just these things that I considered, and that is why I ended up working with the advisor that I work with.
To add to it, so for me, when I got to undergrad, like I said, I took an African history class, and I wanted the professor to mentor me. So every week I would show up to his office hours for a whole year. I did not miss a heartbeat. And he eventually decided to take me on, and then he also introduced me to his other friend, who's a political scientist. So they began to really show me the in and out of academia. And one of the things that they did, so for people who are interested in Africa, the biggest academic conference it's called the African Studies Association. They meet every year in November. So I started going to that when I was in undergrad. And my mentor then started introducing me to important scholars in the fields so that they would get to know me, which was very, very helpful. And that also allowed me to prepare myself for the PhD. So I was able to get straight from undergrad to a PhD program, but then I deferred for a year to go do a master's because my PhD advisor was going to be on leave. And I really like working with my PhD advisor because, as Ishmael was alluding to, you want to work with somebody who is a human, by which I mean has emotional intelligence, understand that you might not necessarily know everything, but is willing to walk you through until you get to that stage that you can walk on your own. And the other thing too that I came to realize is that there are different types of mentors. There's some mentors that will not read my work, but willing to just talk to me about different things, right? So it's good to also measure the temperature of who just likes to talk about, who will give you advice on fashion, who will give you advice on like how to write, who will give you advice on how to navigate the political system that is academia. So I think, really breaking down which meant, who's good for what is beneficial, and also moving beyond your academic space to find mentors outside the university. That is also very helpful.
Yeah, definitely agreed. I was going to make that exact point. I had mentors within the academic space, and then I had mentors outside of the academic space as well. But I'll start with the academic. So we were assigned 2 graduate student mentors and then 2 faculty advisors. My first faculty advisor ended up leaving, and the second one, I thought we were a match made in heaven. She had a Ghana data set that I was going to analyze for my research and all of this stuff. But we had a bit of a tiff where I realized that they didn't really see my humanity, and they were extremely condescending, and that just was not gonna work for me. There are other people in the department who could handle that more harsh and severe style, but it just wasn't my personality. And so the lesson I took from that is you got to know who you are and what you need so that you can find a mentor that matches those needs. So I knew I needed somebody who would advocate for me. And I think Ishmael and Bright have alluded to that you need somebody who's going to mention your name in rooms that you're not in so that you can get to those opportunities that you needed. And so interestingly, everybody on my committee, I ended up taking a course with them in my first year. So they literally watched me grow from day one and supported my work from day one. I showed up to all of their office hours multiple times so they could get to know who I was and know about the work that I was interested in. And so when it came to my MA thesis, 2 out of those 3 people read my MA thesis. When it got to dissertation time, it was a no-brainer that they were going to be on my committee. All of the people on my committee also read my comprehensive exams. So they really knew me well as a scholar. I will say that my chair wasn't the most cuddly person, but she advocated for me. Whatever, there was an event about race, ethnicity, or immigration, she made sure that I was there. She would send me different research opportunities. Same with the mental health expert. White man, very standoffish, but he was great with sending opportunities. And then I had a Black radical thinker to make sure that I had my critical race theory represented. And he was definitely the person who bolstered me up, kept my self-esteem up. So I had 3 different people supporting me in 3 different ways. The last thing I'll say is I have another mentor who's like a big sister to me. And I will say that she chose me as a mentee. I didn't go seeking her out. But she was the person that if for whatever reason, maybe I couldn't get to my parents or whatever, I could go cry to her, or she would be sitting there and praying for me. So I would say that it's important to have somebody who's supporting your spiritual growth, somebody who's supporting your mental health. I had a therapist, and then having those people who support you in the academic space as well. I think with that, you can really have the support you need to get through.
Thank you guys for all that advice. We have our last question here, and it says, what advice would you give to someone who is considering pursuing a doctoral degree in a social science discipline? So we'll go around, and I spoke last, so we'll go Ishmael, then Bright, then lastly, Nana.
I would say just be you, right? And by just be you, what I mean is, like we discussed earlier, you need to make sure that your motivations are right. Define that motivation, define exactly what you want to get out of this program that you are planning to get into, and just go for it. Do not listen to the naysayers, because like I said from the beginning, you can never appeal to everybody's definition of what success is. It's all about you, what is good for you, what you believe God has called you to do. In my case, I mentioned that I believe I'm called to be a teacher. So I don't really care about what people say. So yeah, just be you.
Okay, thank you, Ishmael. Bright.
You know, to build on what Ishmael said, and also to steal from something that I was saying earlier, you have to know the why, you know? Most people say, I want a PhD, I want them to also call me doctor. That is not a good way to pursue a PhD, because the journey is arduous. You know, the journey is definitely tough. It's not easy. It's not, your passion alone cannot carry you through these things. So even if you don't have passion, if you don't understand what is at stake for you, why do you want to wake up every day to push through? If you don't have a better answer, I think you should reflect, because not everybody has to have a PhD. There are other needs in the world. And sometimes people will go and do a PhD and they realize, actually, I don't want this. And then they'll go try to do a second PhD. I know people with 2, 3 PhDs. It makes no sense. You know? So I think at the end of the day, you really have to understand the why. Why do you want to pursue it? what wakes you up that you want to do this? So, and
Thank you, Bright.
Yeah, definitely agree with those. And to that point, the PhD is a very big time commitment. So if you're going to spend 5+ years in a program at the cost of maybe being at a job and gaining 5 years of experience, definitely make sure that you really, really actually want to do it, because it's not glamorous at all. But to say something a little bit different, I do want to highlight that it's really important to go to a school that will support you holistically, and go somewhere where you see yourself fitting in. You don't have to fit in with everybody, but at minimum, there should be at least 3 professors that you can say, oh, hey, I would like to work with those people. You should find at least 1 or 2 other graduate students who you could say, oh, these are going to be my people for these 5+ years. There should be people who see you as a complete person at that school, because that's really the way you're going to get through, right? Those are the people who intimately understand what it's like to go through a program. So when you're going to these, if you're able to, please go to the Admitted Students Weekend, walk around the city, walk around the school, talk to different people, ask a bunch of different people the same question, and make sure they're people who look like you, not just the white people. You need to make sure you talk to Black students and students of color about what it's really like to be in that institution, especially if it's a predominantly white space. So that would be the biggest advice. The other thing I will say is be okay with failure.
Yes.
Research is all about iterating. You're gonna hit walls. You're gonna think that your question makes sense, but then somebody's gonna completely trash it. So just be okay with the fact that sometimes things won't go your way, but it's okay. The point is to be able to persevere. A lot of what a PhD is I always say it's somebody trying to break you mentally, and you just have to keep being strong, mentally strong, and being able to push forward and stay committed to what you want to do. So yeah, if you want to do it, think about where you want to end up and work backwards, and think about how the PhD is going to help you get where you want to be, because it's a stepping stone at the end of the day.
Thank you guys.
and also just to quickly
Sorry, go
add
ahead.
to what Anna said, I think it's also very important to, especially if you go into a predominantly white institution, to study and get the numbers, if possible, the placement of minority students. Because you can have a successful program, but the minority experience is completely different. There have been programs where Black students have just been like basically X'd out of the program, right? Or not getting the same high level of opportunities. So you want to pay attention to all these things.
That's a great point. And just to add on to what you guys have said tonight, we have a few comments in the chat from Auntie Vera. It says, we all need God and a therapist, and also failure is a part of success. Again, we want to thank all our panelists this evening. We would have paid thousands of dollars else if we went to these professional conferences to hear all this free information. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your important schedules to come speak with us tonight. May God continue to bless you guys on your journeys.